I know I usually tend to cover London on this channel, but today I feel like talking about York. York is probably my favourite station outside of London. From the outside, it's not the most grand or ornate, but really you have to look at the inside. Do you see what I mean? That huge curved roof is a sight to behold. There's nothing quite like the sight of an East Coast fast train coming into York. But this isn't York's first station. In fact, it's technically not even the second. The story of York goes all the way back to George Hudson, the so-called Railway King. Hudson was born in humble circumstances, but after taking an apprenticeship in a York draper's shop, he developed a strong head for business, with the help of a substantial legacy from his great-uncle. He also went into politics and became a Conservative Member of Parliament. At some point, Hudson made the acquaintance of George Stephenson. Stephenson was one of the pioneers of railways, arguably the man who did the most to transform trains from industrial plant machinery to the most important mode of transportation of the 19th century. He envisaged a network of railways connecting all the towns and cities of Britain. Hudson was interested in this idea, and in 1833 he became the treasurer and a founding member of York's Railway Committee. The fact was that while York was an important city, it didn't have industry on the scale of other cities like Newcastle, Glasgow or Manchester. If it was to remain a major economic player, it needed connections. One of Hudson's most famous quotes is, "Make all the railways come to York." I don't know whether he actually said that, but undoubtedly he was the driving force behind putting the city on the railway map. The early days of the railways are convoluted, with literally hundreds of companies scrambling to build lines all over the country. Over the 19th century, these would coalesce into larger companies through amalgamation or acquisition. York Station was the brainchild of the York and North Midland Railway, whose straightforward title sets its mission out: a railway to join York with the North Midland Railway. From there, a train could travel over the Midland Counties Railway or the Birmingham and Derby Railway, then over the London and Birmingham Railway to London. Meanwhile, the Great North of England Railway were planning a line of their own from Gateshead to Tadcaster. The York and North Midland pushed for them to terminate at York instead, using a potent combination of engineering arguments, business arguments, and emotional blackmail. They even began preparing for legal action, but fortunately it didn't come to that, and the Great North of England decided to come to York. Via the Great North of England Railway, a train could go on over the Newcastle and Berwick Railway and the North British Railway to reach Edinburgh. York was to enjoy excellent connections. The York and North Midlands engineer was none other than George Stephenson, whose opinion was that the station should be located outside the city walls. It would allow for expansion, and if his ideas about the future of railways were correct, and spoiler, they were, that expansion would be needed. But the directors overruled him. The site they picked was Tanner Row, just inside the walls and a short distance from the current station. But this wasn't the first station. In 1839, the first section of railway from York to Milford was opened, giving the new railway yet another connection with the Leeds and Selby Railway. The station inside the walls was still being built, so a temporary one was put up outside the walls. In 1841, the permanent station opened. Well, I say permanent, but you know. It was designed by G.T. Andrews, and the approach line pierced through the city walls. And within 5 years, Stephenson was proven right. Goods facilities were opened that same year. A second hole had to be made in the walls, and more sidings had to be added. In 1853, a station hotel was built, but due to the restricted space, it was far from the grand edifice the company would have liked. More and more lines were being built. Soon it was possible to get to Scarborough, to Whitby, to Market Weighton, to Knaresborough. It seemed that all the railways were indeed coming to York. But one was coming up from the south that Hudson really would rather was not. The ultimate goal for Hudson and his associates was an East Coast main line, but, and this was the important part, Hudson believed it should be over railways that he controlled. He pushed for a route via the Eastern Counties Railway, which was slow and indirect. Business interests in London and York were not happy about this and started a railway of their own, the Great Northern. Hudson opposed this hard, but in 1849 he'd have bigger problems to worry about. You see, it turns out that the dividends that Hudson's railways were paying out were coming from capital. The railways were, in fact, not making the profits they appeared to be. Meanwhile, Hudson was borrowing enormous sums to keep the House of Cards standing. From the outside, though, the railways looked to be hugely successful, and this meant that Hudson could sell his own shares for far more than they were worth. He wouldn't be the first to try this trick, nor would he be the last. His shareholders, particularly two gentlemen named Love and Prance, demanded answers. Hudson's fall from grace was immediate, with outraged investors demanding his head. His railways had gone from a license to print money to a license to print whatever the opposite of money is. Hudson was sent to a debtor's prison, disgraced. In 1850, the Great Northern Railway began services from York to London via Doncaster and a section of the Lancashire and Yorkshire Railway. Hudson was in no position to object. In 1854, a new railway company appeared on the scene, the North Eastern Railway. This was an amalgamation of several smaller railways, including several of those running into York. This company would continue to expand until it became one of the largest and wealthiest railway companies in Britain, serving the lucrative industries of the North East and controlling a substantial portion of the East Coast Main Line. They made York their headquarters. The Great Northern Railway had some problems with York Station almost as soon as they got there. It was cramped, it was badly located. It was a terminus, which meant that any train going from London to Edinburgh, or vice versa, would steam into York Station and then have to reverse out to continue its journey. What the Great Northern really wanted was a through station. The North Eastern concurred, and in 1865 they applied for permission for a new, larger station outside the city walls. This was approved, but held up when a shareholder started questioning the company's accounts in 1867. Oh no, not again, thought the North Eastern, although they were eventually cleared and work could begin in earnest. The New York Station, as in the new station in York, not the station in New York, had 3 architects. The first was Thomas Prosser, who retired in 1874. Benjamin Burley took over before dying in 1876. William Peachey took over and finished the station in 1877. Incidentally, Peachey would retire that same year. I don't know what the North Eastern were doing to their company architects, I'm sure. The station hotel was the work of Lucas Brothers. The station is constructed in yellow Scarborough brick and initially consisted of 13 platforms. But the most distinctive feature must surely be the 800-foot-long curved overall roof. However, what was perhaps even more appreciated by passengers was the refreshment room. Those were the days before dining cars. So York was an important stopping point for hungry passengers on the Anglo-Scottish expresses. Not just for passengers either. York was the changeover point for locomotives on services between London and Edinburgh. Between London and York, the Great Northern Railway's locomotives were in charge. Between York and Edinburgh, North Eastern engines hauled the train. The station itself was only part of the complex at York. There was the hotel, of course. There were the offices of the North Eastern Railway. There were extensive goods facilities and locomotive sheds. There were carriage sidings and a carriage and wagon works. The station could boast its own gasworks, power station, garage, and even laundry. Other railways ran into York too. The Midland Railway, the London and North Western, the Great Eastern, the Lancashire and Yorkshire, and the Great Central all ran services. And the North Eastern turned a pretty penny servicing their locomotives. In 1923, the North Eastern Railway became part of the London and North Eastern Railway, and so too did York Station. This was a new age of glamour for the East Coast Main Line, with fast and powerful express locomotives able to run the entire distance from London to Edinburgh without stopping. Fortunately, buffet cars were well established by this time. The Second World War saw the station badly damaged by bombing, with air raids in 1941 and 1942 destroying the booking office, the lamp room, the parcels office, and one of the roof columns, as well as 6 empty carriages. I'd now like to return briefly to the old station. You see, when the new station was opened, the old one did not go completely out of use. The hotel was turned into company offices and the tracks were used for storage. As management was located at York, the old station was often used to display new locomotives and rolling stock for inspection. The North Eastern Railway also founded their own museum, and historic items due to be put on display there were kept at the old station pending instalment. The museum still exists, kind of. It was incorporated into the National Railway Museum, which uses redundant railway land and buildings. In 1948, Britain's railways were nationalised. The new organisation, British Railways, was divided into regions. The North Eastern region was headquartered at York. In 1967, the North Eastern region was absorbed into the Eastern region, but the Eastern region chose to be headquartered at York as well. In 1966, the old station would finally be taken out of use. It had spent the past decade as a motor rail terminal. Over the previous couple of decades, the 1877 station had become rather run down. Fortunately, by the 1970s, the folk in charge had some regard for the station's history. The district engineer was a heraldry enthusiast and ensured that the old northeastern ironwork was repainted in correct colours. The screens at the ends of the roof are actually replicas, the wood of the originals having become dangerously rotten by 1972. The aluminium replacements are almost indistinguishable from the originals. In 1988, a number of platforms were taken out of use due to the track layout being modified. The 2000s saw the station renovated and reorganised. In 2011, the old station was converted into council offices. At the time of writing, there's a plan to revamp the area in front of the station, whatever that consists of. York has always been an important destination, and it's still a major stopping point on the East Coast Main Line. While perhaps the modern railway doesn't have the glamour of the North Eastern Railway or the LNER, it's hard not to look at York and get a sense of its importance. George Hudson would be proud. Well, I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, please do leave a like and consider subscribing for more. I'd like to thank my donors on Ko-fi and Patreon, and here on YouTube for your ever-generous support. You are the curved roof to my platforms. And I'll see you all again very soon. Cheerio.